Hi, this is Dan from Bible Prophecy and Truth, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects today, the Seven Trumpets. It's one of my favorites because when I first studied the Seven Trumpets and discovered that we're likely in the midst of the fourth trumpet right now, it blew my mind, and it's so incredible, and I think you're going to feel the same way when we're done. Um, So the first four trumpets are kind of like the first seals, where the seals we have the four horsemen, and then the remaining seals are different. They're a totally different thing than the spirits that were released in the world. The first four trumpets are separated from the last three by the angel that's flying through the air saying "Woe, woe, woe" unto the people of the earth by reason of the next three trumpets which are about to sound. And it's because the first four trumpets are they're kind of like the consequence of sin, the consequence of man's decisions and what we've done and what we're doing. The last three are more of God's in control of this, and He is warning us and giving us basically a last warning to turn to Him before He returns, and it's too late for us, and we end up not getting to be with Him in heaven because we were stubborn and sinful and prideful and didn't turn to Him. It's kind of His last warning. It's the three woes. So we're going to study the first three because those are just incredible when you look at what was shown to John in the book of Revelation and what actually happened in some of the events in the past. And one of the things we have to remember is that John was shown these visions and he wrote what he saw, but he didn't have any frame of reference. He'd never seen a mushroom cloud from a nuclear weapon. He didn't know what a helicopter was, or a jet, or any kind of like the fighter jets we have, of the tanks and attack vehicles and all the different types of military equipment. He'd never seen anything like napalm with a scorched earth weapon or anything like that. The only thing he knew were swords and pitchforks and horses with chariots and things like that. So he didn't have much of a frame of reference. And I always like to ask the question, if you've ever been to an art class and where the teacher had separated the class into two parts and had one part look at a picture or an object and then try to describe that picture or the object in words only, and then had the other half of the class try to draw what the first half of the class wrote down in words only. And it's if you've ever had the experience, then you know what I'm talking about. It's very, very difficult to get the picture painted using only words. And so when we look at the trumpets and we look at all the visions that John wrote down with no frame of reference, then we just have to take that the way it is and just understand that the things he saw and how he described them, and then the things that have actually happened and how they match so closely, is just incredible. So first of all, I want to point out the obvious, which a lot of people have written to me and said, well, it can't be what you say it is, because if it's obvious that this was an asteroid that fell to the earth. When you look at the first and second trumpets, you see hail and fire mingled with blood cast upon the earth, a third part of the trees, and all grass is burnt up. And then the second trumpet, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And a third part of the sea becomes blood, a third part of the sea creatures die, a third part of the ships are destroyed. Now, if you look at that, it sounds an awful lot like a large asteroid with a lot of small asteroids preluding it, plummeting to the earth and crashing into the sea. And you can see, I've got some pictures that I found on the internet here of an asteroid storm, and hail and fire mingled with blood as asteroids are killing animals and people, and a large, huge asteroid as it comes into the atmosphere, catching on fire and burning, and then plummeting into the sea. It sure looks like that's what John. That's like the obvious, right? When John wrote those visions where he saw this great mountain burning with fire cast into the sea, that's the obvious. But when we think about it, the first four trumpets are kind of as I said, they're kind of a consequence of sin, a consequence of man's decisions. And the last three trumpets are the three woes. They're the judgments of God. They're the warnings from God that are going to affect the whole world. Those last three trumpets. The first four are not necessarily that, and the thing is, I don't think God is going to give the whole world the obvious. All right, remember, he taught in parables. He wrote mystery into the Bible to keep those that don't love him from hearing the truth and learning it. And I believe prophecy is in that same vein, where prophecy is written so that if you don't love him, you won't understand. And so he doesn't give us the obvious. And so, and that's the thing I wanted to point out, is that it seems obvious that this must be an asteroid that plummets into the sea. But when you look at what John saw and the events that happened, it's just amazing. And I have to tell you that my wife and I both, when we saw the second trumpet and the third trumpets, especially the third trumpet, our minds were just blown when we first learned how closely they match what John saw. So take a look. So let's look at the first trumpet, and the first trumpet is really kind of an iffy one. There's not very much information about it at all. It just, the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burned up, and all green grass was burnt up. And so we've got the hail and fire mingled with blood cast on the earth, and a third of the trees and the grass being burned up. That's all the information that we have. But if you know history and you know what happened in World War I, you know that that's one of the first times in the history of war that they used scorched earth weapons, where they didn't have what we know as napalm today, but they had like one of the first iterations of that type of weapon, a scorched earth weapon. And so hail and fire mingled with blood being cast to the earth, and a third of the trees being burned up and the grass being burned up. It could be. I mean, this is one of, like I said, it's kind of iffy. It doesn't really have to be that. But the thing about World War I is this is the first time ever in the history of man that a war killed 8.3 million people. That's the first time ever that any type of a war killed that many people. So it would definitely be a significant event at God's timeline and God's creation, where we actually managed to kill enough of each other to be that many people. So again, that one's kind of iffy. You can take it or leave it. It kind of looks like it might have been. There's nothing that says it definitely wasn't. And that's the thing, when we look at prophecy, we have to remember that there can't be anything that doesn't fit, or that's not it. If everything does fit, then it might be it. And especially when things, with prophecy, we have to be very careful that we don't say we know for sure anything until everything has come to pass, because people have been wrong in the past, and even though it sounds kind of like it could be, then it might not be when, after the fact. And we're actually going to look at the fifth trumpet later and look at what some people teach today about the fifth trumpet. And I'm gonna basically go through what I just said, is that if there's any part that does not fit, then that's not it. And that's what we're going to talk about at the fifth trumpet, because I believe that it can't be what certain people teach. But so the first trumpet, there's nothing that says it's not it. It kind of looks like it might be. But then, so now let's go to the second trumpet, because that's the one that's the first one that blew my mind. What happens here? In Revelation 8, it says, the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. So we have a great mountain being cast into the sea. A third part of the sea is blood. A third part of the sea creatures die. A third part of the ships are destroyed. And then we have to remember that John had no frame of reference for atomic weapons, helicopters, aircraft, anything. So when we look at the second trumpet and we look at the Second World War and we think about what happened at Hiroshima, where Hiroshima is right on the beaches, the waterfront of the inland sea in Japan, and it very well could have looked like a burning mountain cast into the sea from John's perspective. And when you look at this picture, this, what does that look like to you if you have no idea what that is, right? I mean, it looks like, if you can see the picture clearly, if you're on a large screen, you can see that there's little ships in front of it. You can see the boat, the actual battleships, and things in the sea around it, and how big it is, and how it would have looked to John if he would have seen that from a ways away. It looks like a great mountain burning with fire cast into the sea, a nuclear explosion. And then a third part of the sea becomes blood. Crude oil is compressed organic material that has decayed and liquefied and pressurized under the crust of the earth. And that's why when they drill for oil, when they hit an oil pocket, it actually starts gushing because it's under pressure. And it's just organic material that is decayed and liquefied and become crude oil. So life to God is blood. And so when we talk about crude oil and how it's, decayed and liquefied, compressed organic material, this very well could be blood according to God. And it makes sense that the sea became blood, because there's millions and millions of barrels of oil that were lost at sea during World War II, destroyed in the ships and the tankers. Oil tankers that were going to refuel, those would get blown up and sunk, because you don't want the enemy to be able to refuel, right? Things like that. I mean, there's a lot of ships at the bottom of the ocean from World War II. In fact, there's one estimate is that there's 36,387 ships that were destroyed. And those ships are all, if they weren't already broken up, they're deteriorating rapidly at the bottom of the ocean and leaking oil. We have no idea the extent of damage to marine life from those ships. And here's a few pictures that I have of some of the ships. On the German ship on the upper right, the lower right is a Russian ship. And then you've got a couple of battleships on the left side that were sunk. I mean, there's almost 38,000 ships at the bottom of the sea. It's just, there's so much down there, and we really don't even know what it's doing. So a third part of the sea became blood or oil. A third part of the sea creatures die. There's a lot of articles. If you go and Google it and just look this up, there's tons of articles out there about how fishermen are talking about how there's just dramatically less fish in the sea than there was a few decades ago. It's changing rapidly, and a third part of the sea creatures die. It's like we're seeing that right now. And the oil, not only oil, but the radiation from nuclear bombs, killing more fish than we ever expected. And then when we look at the third part of the ships were destroyed, we know that this, even though John is talking about, that great mountain burning with fire cast into the sea, we know that this is a war because a third part of the ships are destroyed in this trumpet. So we know that this is a war. So it definitely fits World War II in that sense. And when we look at World War II, one of the estimates is that there was a total of 105,127 ships used in the war, and 36,387 were destroyed. That's almost exactly a third of the ships. To me, when I first heard that, it's like, whoa, wow, everything fits perfectly. And another thing about this war is that, there was 8.3 million people killed in World War I, which was a very significant event. But World War II, there was about 52 million people killed. Definitely a significant event. So now, if that wasn't mind-blowing enough for you, let's look at the third trumpet. This is the one that really did it for me. In Revelation 8:10, it says, "And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." Now you have to, if we pay attention to what it's talking about in this trumpet, the theme of this and the main part of it is that the waters, the rivers and the fountains of waters became bitter and killed people. That's the main theme of this. So when we look at it, the star falls from heaven burning like a lamp. It fell upon the third part of rivers and fountains of waters. The name of the star is Wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, if you research the name Wormwood in the native Ukraine language, you'll find that wormwood actually means Chernobyl. So if you were to read verse 11 in Ukrainian local dialect, you'd read, "And the name of the star is called Chernobyl." And if you know recent history, you know that there was a nuclear reactor in the Ukraine called Chernobyl that blew up in 1986. And this is just an illustration, but a star is made up of constant massive nuclear fusion. That's what a star is. And so a nuclear explosion, a star fell from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. Now, if you saw a nuclear explosion, especially when we know that the first explosion blew the 2 million pound lid off the reactor, the second explosion sent nuclear radiation up a mile into the atmosphere, and it burned in a full nuclear fire for 3 weeks. So if you were looking at that fire, this is an explosion, granted, but if you were to look at that and see that from a ways away, from maybe John's perspective, it kind of looks like a burning lamp. And it's just incredible when you look at all of the parts of this prophecy. There was 10 times as much radiation released as Hiroshima bombing. And when this explosion happened and it burned in a nuclear fire for 3 weeks, it rained incessantly for 5 days. If you've ever been in the tropics and seen a tropical rainstorm, then you know what I'm talking about. It was the worst rainstorm that you can imagine. It just poured for 5 days. And you remember the main theme of this prophecy is the waters. It fell upon the third part of the rivers and fountains of waters, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, that rain, incessant rain for 5 days, all that runoff ran into the streams and the rivers and all over Europe. There's a map here I've got where it shows the radiation cloud, and and where all the highest concentration of cesium is, that's the nucleotide that is poisonous, that's dangerous to mankind. And that's in Chernobyl. Obviously it's the worst, but you can see that all over in Europe, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Rome, all over the place in Europe, it's really high concentration in the waters, in the areas where the cloud went over, and it's just really bad there. That's the thing that people don't understand, is that nuclear explosion, that wasn't just a local catastrophe. There was a few 100,000 people that have died from that directly, but we don't know how many people have died from the radiation cloud and all the water that's been infected in Europe, because the waters is the main theme of this. The waters is what, all that runoff made its way all over Europe, and even though hundreds of thousands have died and millions have been infected by cesium-137, we don't know how many people are what's really been affected by that. The children of people that have been infected by it. That's the thing about this trumpet, is it's the waters is the main theme. And the waters, that incessant rain and the runoff and the water being contaminated by that explosion is the main thing, is the main problem in Europe from that. So when we look at all of that information, it's like, when you look at the first trumpet, it's kind of iffy. You look at the second trumpet, everything fits so well. It's like a glove on a hand. And then the third trumpet, that just blows my mind, that this vision John had fits exactly what happened in 1986. It's just incredible. Now I'm going to end this video, and this is part 1 of the 7 trumpets, and I'm going to pick up the 4th trumpet in the next video.